America is a barbarian society. Watching Trump go from the kind of trickster, symbolically orange, interestingly, to the kind of golden figure. He wants the country to have a golden age precisely to extend a vast middle finger to his opponents. What a slap across the face of the entire bureaucratic system.
He shone a light into a dark corner and then unfortunately found himself there.
But I think it is very important to realize how much of our political life is a matter of projections, of mythic images. I'm going to hope for a moment that J.K. Rowling is not listening to this. Magic is about consciousness. It's not about violating the laws of physics. I have seen statistically improbable coincidences happen so often that you can practically set your watch by them. Magic is the politics of the excluded. People are flocking to Christianity because Christianity seems to be an anchor for the culture. When reason collapses beneath you, what's your reason to do anything?
Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. Today we've got something a little bit different for you. Usually when I'm sat in this seat, I'm about to speak to an economist or a political scientist about the state of the world, or more likely the state of America, which seems to be in a little bit of trouble recently. But today we're coming from a different perspective. John Michael Greer is the former Archdruid of the mysteriously titled Ancient Order of the Druids in America, a mystical group who use magic to explain where we've got to today. And on one of his very rare trips to the UK, I thought I'd pin him down in the studio, try and get some answers out of him, and he joins me now. John Michael Greer, welcome to UnHerd.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to start with your journey, because it's a fascinating one, and I'm sure some of our viewers will be interested to know, how is it that a man from Rhode Island comes to be the Archdruid?
There is no one American Druid order. There are at least 30 of them that I know of, and none of them particularly listens to the others, except we'll get together and people will hang out as individuals. But it so happened I had my original Druid training in the Order of Bards and Druids, which is the largest of the British Druid orders. And after that, I was looking around because I'd finished the training. I wanted to learn more, and I ran across this book by some American Druid who was talking about American Druid orders, and they mentioned this book called this group called the Ancient Order of Druids in America. And the author of the book did not think much of him. It was old. It was stuffy. It wasn't nasty enough toward Christians. He was very much into the neo-pagan thing, and so we have to be nasty toward the Christians, and all these horrible things. And so I immediately knew it was something I wanted to look into. Followed a chapter of accidents where I tried to get in touch with him. There were defunct addresses, there were defunct secretaries, all the usual things, see what happens. I did finally make contact, and found out that there were about 11 people left in the organization. And so we had a series of conversations, mostly by phone, that started with me going, well, I'd really like to find out more about this Ancient Order of Druids in America. It sounds interesting. And proceeded to me saying, wow, this is great. Have you considered blowing the inch of dust or so that's gathered on this off it and putting it back into use? And ended with me saying, you want me to run it?
So it's very much how I ended up with my job here, actually.
Yeah, exactly. But so I proceeded to, I was initiated into it in 3 months. Given the 3 months of on-the-job training, it was going to be a year, but the then Grand Archdruid was in failing health and decided she would. So I had 3 years of 3 months of approximate training, more or less, and then I was pitchforked in
at the deep end.
In the deepest end, but that was fine.
What is a druid?
Modern Druidry has nothing to do with the ancient Druids, except, insofar as we have this dim sense that there were ancient Druids and that dim sense of inspiration to us. Druidry as a modern spiritual tradition emerged in Britain in the early 18th century. You had this tangled situation where people were given two choices. You could either buy into a particularly narrow form of evangelical Christianity, in either its Anglican or its dissenting modes, or you could buy into an equally narrow form of scientific materialism, which was getting and so a number of people said, no, well, we're going to take the third choice. And of course, all the voices of authority says there is no third choice, and they said, well, then we'll make one.
And does it have links to ancient Druidry?
Well,
when you say it starts in 800, that seems relatively recent, something that appears to be aesthetically so ancient.
That's correct. What happened simply was that, these people were inspired by what little was known about the ancient Druids in those days. So we know a little more now, but not much. And so they said, well, we want to be something like that. And so they became something like that and proceeded to do the sensible thing and simply engage in a lot of experimentation, creative borrowing, plagiarism where necessary, all the usual stuff. Sometimes outright forgery. One of the major figures in the history of the Druid revival was a man named Edward Williams, a sufficiently bland name that he took the Druid name Iolo Morganwg. He was a Welshman. He was one of the most glittering stars in the firmament of 18th century literary forgery. He actually made part of his living by writing medieval Welsh poems in perfect medieval Welsh. Some of them weren't detected till the 1950s. And fobbing them off on medieval Welsh poets and claiming to have found these things. Iolo was a strange cat, but he was the kind of con man that was easily convinced by his own forgeries. And by the latter part of his life, he was convinced that this Druid tradition he invented from whole cloth was the actual teachings of the ancient Welsh bards handed down through the generations. They still use his rituals in the Welsh National Eisteddfod. When they do the Archdruid comes parading about and with all the gold and the finery and that kind of stuff. That's all his invention.
Ever wonder why you can't make it through a night without a bathroom trip anymore? By your 30s and 40s, up to 1 in 3 adults deal with nocturia, aka waking up to pee, and it only gets worse with age. Your bladder holds less, your sleep gets lighter, and hormonal changes mean your kidneys keep pumping out urine instead of saving it for the morning. That's what led us to partner with Evening Being by Verso. It has 3 grams of glycine, proven to calm an overactive bladder, dropping nighttime bathroom runs, and it helps you fall asleep faster, stay in deep sleep longer, and feel sharper the next day. Plus, it's melatonin-free, so you don't wake up groggy. Instead, it has clinically studied ingredients shown in multiple human studies to calm the mind, support mood, and promote restorative sleep. After taking Evening Being, customers have reported fewer bathroom trips at night and finally being able to sleep through the night. Catherine says, I used to get up to use the washroom 3 times a night. Since using Evening Being, I'm only getting up 1 time a night, sometimes none. I fall asleep faster and wake up refreshed. While Ken says, I bought this to see if I could get off Ambien, and while I started taking it while on Ambien, I now have transitioned off it. According to my Apple Watch, my sleep quality has actually improved. I do notice it in the morning when I wake up. And Nicholas left a review saying, great taste, helps me sleep deeper and continuously through the night. So click the link in our description or head over to ver.so and use code UnHerd to save 15% on your first order. So what do Druids do? What's a day as a Druid like? Are you praying in a church? Are there gatherings? What's the organisation?
Druid and organization don't always go well together. In fact, mostly they don't go well that together. Basically, it's an orientation. It's an orientation toward nature as the manifestation of the sacred. Whether you want to use a term like God, whether you want to use a term like goddess, whether you want to use the divine, whether you're a polytheist or a pantheist or a monotheist or who knows what. The idea is that if in fact the universe was in some sense the creation of divinity, then we know most about divinity by experiencing the universe, and especially those aspects that human beings have not mucked up completely, as we are so wont to do. So how that expresses in any given Druid's life depends on a lot of factors. There does tend to be a tendency to be more comfortable with the natural phenomena than with, massive amounts of technology, although we're all over the internet. There is a tendency for either 4 or 8, depending on the Druid group, seasonal holidays, which certainly the solstice of the equinoxes, sometimes the 4 points equidistant between those.
And those are kind of derived from nature. They're about natural cycles.
It's about the natural cycles, exactly. The winter solstice does not commemorate any human activity. And so we go. And there are ceremonies. Of course, those differ from group to group and often from individual to individual because there's no dogma. There's no thou shalt do this. We don't play that game.
So there's no rules.
The one rule is that you should find your own inspiration and follow it, and don't maltreat other people. They'll dump you. They'll just turn their back and walk away.
It's probably quite a good way of living life.
It seems to work tolerably well, but it does leave people very frustrated. Well, what do you believe? Well, this whole notion that religion should be about accepting an ideology on faith strikes many of us as daft. It's silly. The idea is not, okay, here is this set of propositions about existence and, let's get into a big quarrel as to whether the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father or from the Father and the Son. As though any human being could know the internal arrangements of the divine. It's really silly. But so, there are various traditions, there are various forms of spiritual practice. Most Druids practice forms of meditation, although which form is a heck of a good question. Again, from Druid to Druid, there are various kinds of ceremonies. Divination is a way to develop the intuition, is very common, but it really varies.
I'm sensing there isn't a kind of coherent story of the Druids in America.
And you'll find that in Britain too. We avoid coherence as a bad idea. There was a Polish literary theorist a while ago, Jarek, who wrote a book on the concept of dissensus. Okay, we've all heard about consensus. Those of us who've experienced it know that it's generally a bad way to run things. Okay, it's a very, very good way to bog yourself down to a point that nothing can happen. Dissensus is the principal avoidance of consensus. If you're lost in a wood, you don't sit down and decide which way is out. You have people go in different directions and search, and everybody goes some different way, and they come back and bring their news. Okay, that's dissensus. It's much more likely to get you out of the woods.
And how do you practice dissensus? Because consensus obviously has a kind of coherence to it in that everyone comes together, shares a point of view or a perspective.
And then they all attempt to hammer out a single thing.
How do you foster dissensus?
First of all, you say there is no fixed ideology. Figure it out for yourself. Secondly, you encourage people to go their own way and then come back and say, well, this is what I found. The Druid email lists, Druid forums, things like that, are very often, this series of seemingly random conversations with people who say, well, I did this at the winter solstice, and these were the results I had. And people going, well, that sounds interesting, and this kind of stuff. And it seems to work. You avoid trying to impose any unit. It's much easier because human beings are naturally dissensus prone. We're all quarrelsome kids. We all disagree with each other, and that's good. That's actually, if in fact one of the points to having human beings at all is that each of us are exploring some part of the human experience. If everyone's doing something different, we're going to get a much broader idea of what the human experience is.
How does the occult and magic fit into this?
Okay, that depends on how you define magic. I'm going to hope for a moment that J.K. Rowling is not listening to this, okay?
She actually might be. Oh, she definitely reads UnHerd.
Oh, that's going to be a problem then. Because,
Sorry, J.K.
No, the whole Harry Potter business, I understand it's very entertaining and all this kind of stuff, but it's become a major obstacle to understanding magic. Everybody thinks you can wave a wand and bellow out ungrammaticus Latinus or something like that, or Latin is execrable, and some impossible thing happens. That's not magic.
What is magic?
Dion Fortune, who was still probably the most influential British exponent of that in the 20th century, and is very influential to this day, defined it as the art and science of causing changes in consciousness in accordance with will. Okay. Now, that's a trickier definition than it sounds because it's not saying whose consciousness is not saying whose will. But it is crucial to realize that magic is about consciousness. It's not about violating the laws of physics. It's not actually supernatural. I personally don't believe that there is anything actually supernatural, anything outside of nature. Now, nature may be a little broader than Richard Dawkins, say, is capable of imagining. That wouldn't surprise me at all. He seems to have a very narrow imagination. But there's no need to postulate some way of breaking the laws of nature. I have never seen anyone levitate a coffee cup, for example. Right. I've seen a lot of practitioners. I've seen people transform their lives completely. For good or ill, you can mess yourself up with magic quite comprehensively. But I have seen statistically improbable coincidences happen so often that you can practically set your watch by them. But nothing actually impossible happened. It's just everything fell into the right order at the right time. Things all fell together. And, all of this has to do with people. All this has to do with choices. Consciousness is involved. So if there's something spooky going on, it's a matter of causation. It's a matter of our scientific materialists have too narrow an idea of the role that consciousness plays in causing experience or in shaping experience.
Do you diverge then from other Druids on this? Because it would seem that there must be a certain group of people in this kind of community, mystical community, who do believe in the supernatural.
I have yet to meet one I've met people who don't actually practice, who hold that belief. I have never met anybody who is a serious practitioner of magic who believes that they can levitate coffee cups. Much less, jump onto brooms and go zooming away or play Quidditch or something.
Well, the reason I have you here today is because, as I was saying to you before we started rolling, I will sit in this chair and ask economists, political scientists, even rock musicians in the past, why they think the world has got to the place that we're at now, especially in your case, your home country of America.
Oh, yes.
Because it seems to be in a particularly interesting moment in history.
Interesting is a very good word for it. It's like the apocryphal Chinese curse.
Yeah,
may you live in interesting times and come to the attention of influential people.
Exactly. I'm trying to be polite here, but obviously it's a mess.
But America has always been a mess. That's the nature of things.
But what do you explain this moment as? I mean, if we had to give it a kind of diagnosis, America as it stands, you know, we've got Trump in the White House, recent kind of public divorce from Elon Musk, and then also the kind of civil strife that we've seen just over the last week in California, incredibly accelerated rise of social fabric breaking down, it seems, political tensions socially, even within families, over issues, really existential issues about the question of where America is headed. How do you think we've got here? What does this moment symbolize for you?
The first thing the first thing that I think is crucial to remember here is that the United States is not a civilized society. It is very common in history that you get a thin veneer of a civilization derived from some decadent imperial power that spreads over a barbarian society. And so you have, Visigothic kings wearing togas, or you have American presidents aping European politicians or what have you. But America is a barbarian society. We swagger around with our guns the way Visigoths swaggered around with their swords. It is the nature of our society.
Has it always been that way?
Well, yes. Yes. There are some occult traditions that suggest that we'll finally get around to creating a civilization around 2600 AD.
Got a bit to wait then.
It's a slow process. Civilization has to ripen on its own time. And by that time, of course, Europe will have long since fallen into decadence and collapse and things like that. No, keep in mind, one of the standard lessons of all of the old traditional paths is that time is a circle and not a straight line. We are not marching gloriously onward toward some kind of Tomorrowland fantasy.
The MLK history is an arc that bends towards justice.
The arc of history bends toward decline and collapse. Okay? And that's just normally, everybody who is listening to this will get old and die. Well, not all of them will get old, but all of them will die. Some of them will not be lucky enough to get old first. Civilizations are the same way. Cultures rise and then they fall. They age and then they die. And in this situation, as in so many other situations in the past, we have a culture that is not yet born, a civilization that is still in its formative stages, interacting with an old, decadent, declining civilization. And there are certain complexities that come from that. And so this linear notion, well, there are really two linear notions of history. You have the Tomorrowland fantasy, the notion that history has to give us exactly what we want, whether that is, the Star Trek, fully automated gay space communism. Okay, whether it's that or whether it's the sort of green fantasy where we have a suburban lifestyle powered entirely by solar panels and windmills or what have you. And so there's that. Then there's the equal and opposite fantasy of apocalypse. We will all die next Thursday because the catastrophe, the apocalypse of the month club that the mainstream media so often markets.
The doomsday clock that we always see.
Exactly, the doomsday clock. There are all kinds of doomsday clocks, and they're all broken.
They're getting so close to midnight now on the doomsday clock. They're going to have to start going backwards, aren't they?
It's been so close to midnight. It's been wiggling around in those last 5 minutes for how long?
Those guys must be stressed.
Exactly. The thing is, when I was a child, it was a few years ago now, everyone was convinced, there's no way we'll get past the year 2000 without everyone dying in a nuclear war or dying of overpopulation. Well, population is peaking at this point. Africa is the only continent on Earth that has a fertility rate high enough to increase. China is now in full-blown population collapse. India has crested and is starting to peak. Europe, of course, is practically becoming depopulated. And the Americas, which were booming at one point, are now well into decline. The population boom has given rise to the population bust because change does not follow linear patterns. Any straight line extrapolation taken far enough always ends in absurdity. And yet, that's almost all we're offered, either by the Tomorrowland fetishists or the apocalypse fetishists. It's all, we take the trends we want to follow and we extend them in a straight line, and they reach the destiny of our dreams and our fantasies, whether those be fantasies of, zooming through the galaxy on gigantic steel phalluses, or whether it be that of cowering in a burnt-out basement, at least going, thank God I don't have to go to work today.
That's me on a Sunday evening. In the cyclical idea of history, where would this moment be in other cycles? So if you imagine if the cycle has happened many times, are there other points that would seem relatively similar to the point that we're at now?
It's a little complex because one of the variations is that some civilizations establish a single imperial state in their final phase. Others do not. The ancient Maya, for example, did not. The classical world did. We all know about the Roman Empire. Europe did not. Came fairly close. Napoleon, I think, was probably the closest approximation to it. And if he'd managed to beat Britain, if he managed to get his troops across, we would all be, you would all be subjects of a sprawling, decaying French Empire that would not be that different from the EU, all things considered. Little less German influence.
No Ursula von der Leyen, maybe.
Yeah. Well, it's been a source of quite some amusement to some of us in the United States that after fighting two immense bloody wars to try to contain Germany, Europe then turned around and gave the Germans everything they wanted out of the war except for a victory parade down the Champs-Élysées. Okay.
I've spoken to Curtis Yarvin about this. His theory is that Europe did not, well, at least the kind of greater European powers did not win the Second World War.
Well, they didn't. No, Europe was defeated and conquered by the Russians and the Americans. I mean, Britain was faced with a choice. Do you want to speak German or do you want to put up with McDonald's? And we know which happened, imagine in the reign of Queen Victoria if somebody had said, oh, by the way, American troops are going to have permanent bases on English soil. We're going to occupy your country. And they'd be horrified. No, can't have that. But in fact, that's what happened in 1942.
All of your culture will now be provided by America.
And we'll have troops here to make sure you behave yourselves.
When you say it like that, it seems quite sinister.
It was a peaceful conquest, but we conquered and occupied Britain in 1942. It was that or let the Nazis take over, and I think it was probably a good choice. I mean, I won't claim that the United States has been a special force for good. No nation ever is. But I think you came out a lot better, all things considered. Generally speaking, I mean, people talk about how, it's horrible, the U.S. global hegemony and this kind of stuff. But look at the choice that the world faced. It was either the Soviet Union, with its gulags and mass graves, or it was Nazi Germany with, we don't even have to go into details there, or it was the United States. Okay, so you had to put up with some McDonald's and some really bad culture and some awful beer. And of course, a lot of plundering. I mean, our economy runs off the take that we rake in from the rest of the world, as the British Empire did in its day. That's normal. That's what empires are there for. But
better the devil you know, maybe.
Yeah, well, or just, given a choice of devils. There's the one who will, feed you McDonald's and make you watch our horrible TV shows. And the one that will, round up 10% of the population, march you off to gas chambers. Take your pick.
It's a real pick your poison at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Pick your poison.
Speaking of McDonald's, let's talk about Donald Trump. You've written about him for UnHerd. Tell me what you think about him. He's an outsized figure, of course, in American life, now more so than ever. What did you feel when you found out that he was going to be president for a second time?
I wasn't surprised in the least. I was the irregularities surrounding the 2020 election were interesting, and it fascinated me that they ended up blowing back to his benefit, because he had. I mean, if they had simply let him serve 2 consecutive terms, the second term would have been not much different from the first one. He would have been hamstrung by by call it the deep state if you want, by the permanent bureaucracy. As it was, he ended up with a grudge the size of Greenland. He ended up with making common cause with a lot of people in the New Right who didn't necessarily have that much in common with his, but they were willing to support him and back him. And he ended up being able to lay extremely detailed plans. So he hits the ground running at a speed that I think no previous administration has ever done. One of the things you will not get if you watch U.S. corporate media is that outside of what we can call the professional managerial class, the PMC, outside of the PMC, he's wildly popular. For a very simple reason. Inflation is actually down. Gas prices are down. These basic, I know there's a lot of people who think, oh, that shouldn't matter. You should worry about, this list of mediagenic causes that we think are far more important than your being able to pay your bills. But most people would rather pay their bills. Yeah. And also at this point, the PMC has been such such a bunch of turds to so many people, so much arrogance, so much snottiness, so much patronizing nonsense that at this point, even if the rate of inflation hadn't gone down, the mere fact that he's firing Washington bureaucrats by the truckload would have people adoring him, because an enormous number of people hate the managerial class. They want to see it, pushed face first into the gravel a few times, the way they've been pushed face first into the gravel by the managerial class.
He becomes almost like a revenge candidate.
Exactly, very much so. Very much so. And the mere fact that they hate him so much makes him popular.
Of course, and that's what, January 6th and the kind of civil unrest around the result of the last election actually brought him, as you say, was 4 years of fermenting a kind of anti-establishment aura around him that perhaps wasn't actually earned.
No, of course it's not. The thing is, he is a screen onto which people project archetypes. He's very good at that. What Carl Jung called projection.
He's a cipher.
Yeah, but not so much. I mean, he has his own personality. But any public figure, if they have any charisma at all, if they have any capacity to break out of the sort of Keir Starmer colored beige ooze of ordinary bureaucratic public life, becomes a receptacle for projections. And the same is true of celebrities. Many of these people are just these bland little people, but we turn them into quasi-deities because we have these emotional needs that we project on other people.
And Trump's good for that because he also is strong about projecting his desires.
Exactly.
He's not afraid of his own desire.
Exactly. And he is the quintessential American. He's brash, he's loud, he's rude, he's crude, he has gold-plated toilets. He eats McDonald's. I have no idea, this kind
His selfishness almost seems to go full circle to the point where people feel that they can identify if a man that selfish is running the country, it can only be good for us because he only wants to win. And I sense that from Americans I speak to, that they truly buy into that. They believe that to be true.
Well, at this point, among other things, I think many people are quite aware that he wants the country to have a golden age precisely to extend a vast middle finger to his opponents. And if he can drive inflation down and benefit people this and cause economic improvements and this kind of stuff, what a slap across the face of the entire bureaucratic system that not only couldn't do that, wouldn't do it if they could. We're happy, what's your problem? Was really the attitude of the PMC for so many years. But I think it is very important to realize how much of our political life is a matter of projections, of mythic images. Watching Trump go from the kind of trickster figure, symbolically orange, interestingly, and to the kind of golden figure that he's trying to become. You've probably seen the Italian float of the God Emperor with the Twitter sword in one hand and so on,
which takes a kind of amalgamation of mythic imagery, doesn't it?
By 2017. Some of his young fans in the sort of 4chan, Keck worshipping basement building I'm using their own description here, okay? We're describing them not as POTUS, President of the United States, but as GEOTUS, God Emperor of the United States.
I think he probably believes that to some degree, doesn't he?
I'm quite sure he does. The fact that he so narrowly avoided execution. And isn't it interesting, there's been absolutely no discussion of the assassin or of anything related to that. It fell into a black hole a day or two after it happened.
Yeah, I can't recall any coverage of any trial or anything.
There was nothing.
And he felt that he had been saved by God. Do you think that there is some truth to that?
I have no idea. I do know that it is quite common for really charismatic figures of a certain type to be able to get away with things like that. There's the old thing, one does not simply shoot Napoleon. Napoleon could go charging into the front lines of battle in the Napoleonic Wars, where people were dying like flies around him. There wouldn't even be a bullet hole in his hat when he was finished. When people have that kind of charisma, it has an effect on other people.
That's probably why people couldn't believe that JFK was killed by a random guy who had a fixation on him, because he felt unkillable in that Trump way.
Yeah, and whether there was a random guy involved, we will never know.
JFK, like the Epstein files and many others, have kind of come to the fore as well again with Trump. It's this interesting mode that he's got into, which is the kind of conspiracy revealer in chief. He has taken up the mantle of the conspiracy theorist to a degree.
That's that solar energy. He has taken on that golden solar archetype and is shining light into all kinds of dark corners, or at least people expect him to do so.
Well, unfortunately, it seems to be, at least from what Elon Musk is saying, is that he shone a light into a dark corner and then unfortunately found himself there.
Oh, yes.
Which does, I suppose, is a risk.
Always. 1,000 years from now, the figure of Donald Trump may well be, one of there will be like legendary sagas, produced during the deindustrial dark ages to come by the descendants of today's rap musicians. Oh, seriously, rap music is the progenitor of the great bardic traditions of the deindustrial dark age. I've heard a version of Beowulf done as rap, and it works. Seriously, it works very well. It will be completely garbled, of course, and it will have no more to do with the actuality of Donald Trump than the legends of King Arthur have to do with the rather coarse and hard-bitten Roman British general who set the myth in motion. But he'll be in there somewhere because he's become that kind of magnet for emotions, for that soul or that image of solar glory. And if he does, as truly transformative American presidents usually do, and dies in office, which I expect.
Of natural causes or?
Anyone's guess. In the case of FDR, it was natural causes. In the case of Abraham Lincoln, we all know what happened there. But those are the two examples that I have in mind. Both of them presided over a complete transformation of American politics and society. And both of them died in office and immediately gave rise to a cult. The cult of Lincoln remains very powerful. The cult of FDR not so much, because the New Deal turned into such a bureaucratic nightmare, long after his time, to give him credit.
Critics of MAGA, the Make America Great Again movement, would say that it is already a cult.
Oh, of course it is.
Do you see it that way?
Oh, of course. You can't get social change without a cult. If MAGA is a cult, so is the whole green climate change thing. So is equality. The arc of history bends toward justice. Well, no, it doesn't. But it's a great mantra for people to recite in that particular cult. Rationality plays a much smaller role in our life than I think, and I don't just mean American life, than anybody likes to think. Rational thinking is this paper-thin veneer over the top of a perfectly ordinary primate nervous system. And most of our activities are governed by the same forces that govern the activities of a troop of baboons.
It does seem that we're coming to the end of a cycle of rationality obsession.
Oh, yeah.
The Stephen Pinkers and Richard Dawkins of the world seem to have lost their grip somewhat on the culture.
They've lost their grip in several senses, in fact. But yes, the thing is, this is also normal. In history, you typically, societies emerge. As they are born, you have an age of faith, because all you have to work with are religious metaphors. And then gradually those become unsatisfactory, and you end up with the age of reason, which just takes the religious metaphors, files off the serial numbers, and puts humanity in place of God, or the gods, or whoever, whatever the divine principle is. And then the age of reason becomes toxic because we're not that smart. And all these marvelous rational plans turn out to fail miserably. The Greek philosophers, several of them tried to set up cities and things like that, and none of that worked at all. And so eventually people start saying, okay, that didn't work. And then you have what Oswald Spengler referred to as the second religiosity, the return to religion, not as a living spiritual force, but as a set of social forms that we can use as barriers against chaos. That's where we are now. We're watching people, certainly in the United States, I understand elsewhere also, people going back into the most traditional religious bodies. The Orthodox Church is getting some attention. The more traditional end of Catholicism. In America, some of the more old-fashioned, formal, conservative Protestant sects are getting a lot of attention also, because it's something to believe in.
Most highly symbolic as well.
Yeah.
Of the choices. It's the same here, I think. The Church of England doesn't seem to be massively kind of growing the softer side of Christianity. No. But a kind of high Catholicism seems to be picking up young people. Everybody
because people want forms, people want walls, they want a framework that when reason collapses beneath you, what's your reason to do anything? How can you figure out your way when the map you're reading first turns out to be completely false and then catches on fire and burns up in your hands? Okay. You go back to the nearest set of clear distinctions that you can find, the nearest set of clear, cogent rules. And religion provides that. But it's a very different kind of religion. It's not a religion of mystics and saints and, people sitting in the wilderness talking to God directly.
Though there is some of that, I would say.
Some of that.
I wonder what you think of the kind of increased interest in these kind of alternative mystical traditions.
Well,
because
that's
we
the
mentioned
other side.
January 6th, and, you know, of course, there's the famous image of the QAnon shaman, as he was called. And then after that, you know, we've got Witch Talk, which is these, you know, female witches on TikTok hexing Trump. It's a lot. There's a lot of occult imagery language being used.
There are two factors going on there. The first is that magic is the politics of the excluded. You will find that magic thrives most in any social group that is excluded from using the political system to get redress of its grievances. The classic example is African Americans in the United States. The two golden ages of hoodoo, of the African American folk magic, were first of all during slavery, when, of course, they had no access to political, and then during the Jim Crow era after the end of Reconstruction, from then until the 1960s, when, again, they were largely excluded from using political means to benefit themselves. They turned to magic because that was what was available, causing change in consciousness in accordance with will, and not just your own consciousness, messing with the man. You can do it for that purpose. And so, first of all, one of the reasons that an enormous number of people are turning to things like magic at this point is precisely that so many people are excluded from the political process. All the political parties are in so many places are simply mouthing the same slogans and, you know, there's no, and saying, well, those things that are important to you, we're not going to deal with them. They are not of interest to us. Instead, we are all going to talk about climate change. Or what have you, you know, choose your example. Choose your issue that does not touch the very serious challenges that working class people, for example, face at this point. Yeah. And so they turn to magic.
So it's for the disenfranchised.
Exactly. It's the politics of the disenfranchised. The politics of the excluded is magic. So you have that on the one hand. On the other hand, as the second religiosity builds, it increasingly is not actually spiritual in nature. It is very much social and cultural. I forget which famous atheist recently converted to Christianity because...
Well, Richard Dawkins recently said he was a cultural Christian.
Yeah, and that's such a perfect example. A cultural Christian. What on earth does that mean? It's certain... I mean, did Christ die on the cross to establish modern English culture? Presumably not.
To defend Richard there, he probably means that he has grown up and been affected by, deeply impacted by a Christian culture, and therefore he cannot separate himself from...
And he's absolutely right. But he wasn't saying this, as I recall, as though it was a dreadful burden. And in fact, as I recall, he was saying some things about it. He was saying some rather nasty things about Islam in the same context. So, no, the people are flocking to Christianity because Christianity seems to be an anchor for the culture, an anchor for the cultural forms and norms. But that is also dissatisfying for many people, and it also tends to mostly attract people from the comfortable classes. As you go further down the social scale and further up to the fringes, in such times you get an efflorescence of weird, exotic faiths, whose primary value is that the rulers and shakers of society can't stand them. In Roman times, that led to Christianity.
This is like Satanism, Wicca, movements that are directly in opposition.
Not Satanism. Satanism is the most faux oppositional thing as possible. Especially, you know, the Satanic Temple. It's just a liberal marketing group. The pressure group has found some unusual marketing.
They're just like annoying goths.
Exactly. Yeah. Are there another kind? You know?
I used to be a goth.
Well, but you're not now. Are you?
No, I'm not.
You're not. Are you? Are you less annoying now than you
I'm
were
much
then?
less annoying.
Well,
I hope so. Anyway, I want to ask you about Elon Musk before we run out of time, because he's also a interesting, as I said before, figure. So what do you think of him? What do you make of Elon Musk? What is his role in this constellation of characters? Where do you see his position going?
First of all, Musk has made all his money off government subsidies. Every industry he gets into because he can get lots of money from the government for it. And that's his genius. He's great. He's a great showman. He's a great performer, as of course is Trump. But there very often isn't a lot of there. I mean, we have not yet seen the artificial intelligence bubble go bust. We're going to. It's like announcements for nuclear fusion, okay? When I was born, it was 20 years in the future. When I die, it'll be 20 years in the future. When human beings have been replaced by the distant descendants of chipmunks 50 million years from now, we'll still be, 20 years in the future. In the same way, we've been promised all along that, the goal of a general artificial intelligence is within reach. And now that, these large language models are producing some interesting attempts to fake that. They don't do very well. They have a galaxy of problems, and even the more intelligent people within that tradition are saying within that movement are saying that this is not our, general intelligence. It's slightly better than those, those text generator programs that generating something that sounds vaguely like a human being.
We're not reaching the singularity in the forthcoming weeks.
The singularity is the second coming in drag, in techno-drag. If you look at if you look at these what do you call them? The people who are into the extropians, the singularitarians and so on, all they're doing is fundamentalist Christianity in techno-drag. Superintelligence computers is Jesus. The robot bodies in which to our brains are the glorified bodies of the less. Outer space is heaven. Point for the singularity is the second coming. It's all the same thing. I was mentioning that rationalists tend to take religious ideas, file the serial numbers off them. It's a great example. But Musk was very useful. This is something that Trump does in business. He'll find somebody who has access to a talent pool, get the guy involved, and then chuck him and keep the talent pool. He's got the talent pool. He needed a bunch of self-weaponized autists to do what he needs to have done to break through all the layers of protective camouflage and squid ink in our federal financial structure. Trump has that group now. And it will now be very useful for him to distance himself from Musk and for Musk to distance himself from him, because Musk's business is being very badly impacted. It is not impossible the two of them sat down together over beers or something and decided that, okay, now it's time for the quarrel, not least because that will occupy the media. Well, Trump does something else. I mean, he does this all the time. He's like a man with a laser pointer, getting the cats to go running this way, that way. Do you remember the whole covfefe business?
Yes, yeah.
Exactly. One word. Everyone's running around. He's playing the laser pointer. The media is running after it like the cats. So I think this may well be an example of that. But it was a good time for Trump to ditch Musk. I mean, this is Donald Trump we're talking about. He doesn't want anyone sharing the limelight. He's got to be this golden figure and the God Emperor. So, and it's convenient for Musk. And so I look at that and say, I suspect we will see Musk overtly moving into a more moderate standpoint and not really being a little less political for a while and trying to regain his business position.
Who are the elites in this new world? Because, of course, if you run on a platform of gutting the deep state, draining the swamp, and then you emerge as the swamp monster, so to speak. What happens now?
The first thing that you have to remember is the United States is bankrupt. The United States has been floating a fantastically oversized federal bureaucracy and various hangers-on through slush funds, floating it entirely off of the take from the dollar as global reserve currency. That's collapsing now. Slowly, and it's very important that it be slowly so there be as few disruptions as possible. But it is necessary for the United States to shrink its bureaucratic class to about maybe 20% of its current level to get to the point where we can actually pay our own bills. That's going to involve the gutting of the managerial class. And a lot of the shrieking and squealing that's going on right now is a function of the managerial class being aware of the fact that they're on the menu. So we're also seeing a usual elite replacement cycle where that bureaucratic class that has run things is being replaced by an entrepreneurial class. In another 50, 60, 70 years, that entrepreneurial class will be replaced by yet another class. It's a normal cycle. And so there will always be an elite class. Every society more complex than the very simplest hunter-gatherer bands has an elite class, and those have elite members.
But I just wonder what happens when those elite members are made up of the same people who have got there through being anti-elite explicitly.
That happens all the time. That's normally what happens in an elite replacement cycle, as happened with the bureaucratic class in the 1930s and 1940s. They come on with this whole, we must cast down the evil elites and blah, 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 blah. And of course they become the elites, and that rhetoric just kind of goes away.
What's your vision for America then before we end? If you can look into the future and imagine what America might look like in 10, 25, 50, 100 years, what does that look like to you? Is there a way of changing course now?
There is this pervasive fantasy that that's a very complicated term, of course, we can decide on the course of a nation, of a civilization. I don't believe that's true. I think we can affect our own lives and those of our families and just to a limited extent of our communities, depending on the size of our communities. I don't suggest trying to single-handedly change the course of Greater London, for example. But I think that the theorists of historical cycles have shown very clearly that ultimately these things follow their own life cycle. The United States is going through the very rough transition as the European, use Spengler terms again, pseudomorphosis, the sort of overlay of the veneer of European culture, that's starting to break down. And we'll be moving through a period of political turmoil. It'll be interesting to see if we can hold together as a single nation. I mean, well, to a very real extent, we're not. We are a collection of nations under one government. But to what extent there's going to be a single political unity there for the extended period is a good question. But we have a long way to go and many changes to go through before anything authentically American can emerge. And it will not look like a European society. It will also not look like a Chinese or an Indian or a Russian or what have you society. Each civilization, each great culture, in Spengler's terms, has its own shape and its own vision and its own destiny. They do follow the same life cycle, just as every human being ends up having their own manners, their own ways of doing things, and although they all get old and die.
Is there anything that defines the American soul?
I can only speculate. I mean, it's not as though I have a soloscope that I can okay, there we go, right there. There is a concept that I learned originally from the trade language of the Northwest Native American peoples, actually the northwestern quarter of North America. This was used by all the tribes and also by both the various European nations and Chinese and Filipino workers who came over in the Chinook jargon, Chinook in its own terms. The term is tamanos. It is the personal spirit. It's to some extent it's a spirit you get through a vision quest, but it's also your luck and your destiny and your personal dynamic. And it's irreducibly individual. This is the thing that sets it apart from many other societies have this notion that there's this one spiritual focus for everybody. And America has never been able to make that work. Even we bring Christianity over and immediately somebody puts dynamite under it and it breaks apart into 100 different competing sects. And that's just to get started. The guy who founded the state of Rhode Island, for example, Roger Williams, founded the First Baptist Church. I'm not saying just it was the first ever Baptist church anywhere. Then he broke from it because he disagreed with the church that he himself had founded. That's quintessentially American. And so this concept of tamanos, this concept of the independent individual spiritual vision for the dream, the novel that guides each person as something irreducibly personal. I see that as central to the American experience, central to the whatever linkages of the human soul are rooted in the land, because of course it was something that was very powerful in native times as well, going back as far as we can tell. So I see that as kind of the shape that things will take as we go. And it will be endlessly annoying to people from Europe and people from from West Asia, people from all these other places who have a radically different spiritual focus, because the Americans just will not behave. Well, we won't. We never do. And we elect people like Donald Trump precisely because there is only one of him and nobody else can even imitate the guy. That makes him quintessentially American.
John Michael Greer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that was John Michael Greer, Archdruid, and also great philosophical thinker about all things American politics. He takes the view that Trump is a kind of sun king with solar energy that will put him in the history books for many millennia to come. Elon Musk there, he has some more skeptical words for. He thinks that perhaps he was just a pawn of Trump over the last few years to gain the power of those weaponized autists, as he called them. He has brought around him to help with dismantling the deep state. Whether or not they'll be successful is another matter entirely. But thanks to John for coming on, and to you for watching. This was UnHerd.